This is TWiT. I see the big article came out.
It did.
How long have you been working on this?
A couple of months, I'd say like 2, probably on and off.
Blowing the lid off of it.
Yeah, a call came in during an ad break for last week's show about last-minute things working on that article.
Wow.
So it was very to the wire.
A Healthtech unicorn leaves a trail of clinic complaints and concerns over billing practices. Is this Theranos Act 2 or what?
I mean, it certainly bears some similarities. I think one of the original tips I'd gotten about this, I got on the phone with the source and they were like, oh, let me give you some background. This startup called Athelas started in kind of like the mid-2010s, was co-founded by a Stanford dropout, and the purpose was to create a machine that would use a single drop of blood for diagnostics. And I was like, oh, you don't say. I have heard of that. Surprisingly, that technology didn't end up taking off for a number of reasons, and it turns out they've had a lot of pivots along the way.
Did they predate Theranos with that proposal?
No, Theranos was actually a decade before that.
Interesting.
Almost. But it's very interesting when they kind of started to take off as a company. It was, 2016-ish, and this was just, I think the Wall Street Journal articles about Theranos first surfaced in 2015. And so, of course, the CEO and co-founder of this got a bunch of questions from the media being like, are you Theranos 2.0? Mm-hmm. And he was like, Theranos was a great idea, but, what we really just need is someone to do that, but legitimate. And it kind of, I think, is interesting given everything that happened next.
So they never did the blood drop test device.
I mean, they did do the blood drop test device. It just ended up not being as successful or scalable as they would hope.
That's interesting.
I think one of the pitfalls when you're a startup that's raised a lot of venture capital, and they've raised $150 million at a multi-billion-dollar valuation at this point, is you have this pressure to grow bigger and bigger. And in this startup's case, they ended up doing the blood testing device. It helped you kind of figure out the number of white blood cells in your blood. But it really ended up taking off only among a specific subset of patients who were being treated for schizophrenia with this one drug. So it wasn't
kind of
super
a limited
scalable.
Market. Yeah.
Yeah. So they ended up pivoting in like 2019 to this hot new market called like remote patient monitoring.
Telehealth.
Essentially where... Yeah, telehealth. Medicare and Medicaid had just put out new billing codes that allowed you to get reimbursed for this. So a lot of companies were diving in. It's essentially like, if your doctor sees you have hypertension, they'll send like a blood pressure cuff to your house, and you could test every other day to make sure your blood pressure's all right. And then the doctor gets reimbursed for you doing that and them reviewing the results. But as this program scaled up, a lot of employees started kind of raising the alarm internally, because a big part of the billing process for what I just described is in order to get reimbursed by agencies like Medicare or most insurers, the patient has to actually kind of use the device consistently. The actual rule is it's got to be 16 times a month, 16 different days in order for you to bill it monthly. And this startup had kind of an interesting interpretation of how that worked. They were like, well, the rule says we have to send 16 days of health data. Technically, the blood pressure cuff, it's internet connected. So every day it's sending its battery life.
Even nobody's
and
using
cell phone connectivity, even if no one's using it or just using it once. So a bunch of people had been kind of like, hey, I'm not sure if that's entirely within the spirit of the law. And it turns out a lot of attorneys that I spoke to agree with this.
Wow. Do you think it was intentionally shady, or they just maybe didn't read the rules closely enough?
I mean, I cannot comment on their intentions or not, because obviously I am not the person. But I think it is interesting that I think that there are like certain patterns of behavior you could see where if something's unintentional when it comes to acts that could rise to like Medicare fraud, ideally, if someone raises the alarm about this, the company's or doctor's response would be, oh my gosh, let's fix this. Yeah. And it does seem curious that there were a number of times over the past couple of years that, sources say current employees or former employees raised concerns about this.
Right.
And every time they were like, nah, it's fine.
Their timing was good. They launched this a year before the pandemic. Then all of a sudden, telehealth is like the hot thing, right?
Yeah, and it became even more lucrative and easy to bill for. They had all these kind of concerns come up, and so eventually they were like, let's pivot to a different business. And essentially the business they pivoted to in Act 3 is, I won't bore you with the details, but it's kind of like the back end for doctors and clinics as far as finances go. Like, we'll help you submit insurance claims and whatnot. And they pitched all these different doctors saying like, hey, we'll supercharge your business. We've got all this high-tech stuff or AI-powered. It'll be fantastic. But once these doctors switched over their whole billing operations to this startup, a lot of them experienced serious drops in revenue. One who went on the record in this story said the first, I think, two or so months they worked with this company, they got $0 back from insurers. And they had to take a 6-figure payday loan in order to make payroll.
Oish. The story is on the information you subscribe, of course. The healthcare unicorn leaves a trail of clinic complaints, concerns over billing practices. This is I really honor the information for doing this kind of deep journalism and giving you the time to do it right, which is great, Paris Martineau. We like your work. We're thrilled. Alex Kantrowitz has said this several times. He's the creator of the Big Tech podcast and newsletter. And he says the problem really is the financialization of the tech sector, that there's so much money going around with VCs and stuff that it encourages people to kind of scramble to find something to raise money on. And when you start getting billion-dollar valuations, there's a lot of pressure to deliver.
It's sort of like an awful lot of rent-seeking. How can we extract money out of it versus how can we build sustainable
real innovation
businesses? Well, sustainability. And so there is some question about people are like, well, this is the end result of capitalism. I think it's just sort of, we may have some rules that guide capitalism, our version of it, that create incentives that don't lead us to actually get things that we want. We may have rules that encourage, essentially looting, taking out whatever you can as quickly as you can. A lot of our laws are built to protect shareholders, protect the financiers, because we want them to be able to comfortably contribute capital and feel like they can get it out. But we may be favoring those interests at the expense of, but long-term, are the businesses sustainable? And maybe they could have been sustainable businesses, but the businesses are in a position where they're having to make choices that skew the interests and may compromise long-term sustainability versus short-term protecting certain interests so they can get their money out.
So you mean Adam Smith was wrong and that the free hand of the market just isn't sufficient to make it all work perfectly?
He might be right, but we don't have a free hand of the market doing. We've already got an awful lot of...
It's all messed up already.
There's a lot of fudging happening, and we're just not cognizant of well-tuning the fudging, so you get these collateral effects.
Hey, we should talk Linux. It's the operating system that runs the internet, a bunch of game consoles, cell phones, and maybe even the machine on your desk. But you already knew all that. What you may not know is that TWiT now has a show dedicated to it, the Untitled Linux Show. Whether you're a Linux pro, a burgeoning sysadmin, or just curious what the big deal is, you should join us on the Club TWiT Discord every Saturday afternoon for news, analysis, and tips to sharpen your Linux skills. And then make sure you subscribe to the Club TWiT exclusive Untitled Linux Show. Wait, you're not a Club TWiT member yet? Well, go to twit.tv/clubtwit and sign up. Hope to see you there.